From the south, they came. A horde that had been years in the making, brought together by a new sense of purpose, by the promise of revenge on those that had turned them into monsters, by the promise of a new homeland for super mutants. Now, as all the super mutant tribes gathered together under the new warlord Vicious, they worked with a single-minded purpose. They came to the Commonwealth to wipe out the scourge of mankind, to make the rubble of the Commonwealth into a home of their own. The long-promised age of the super mutant was finally at hand. Vicious and his lieutenants had been planning this assault for months. Through their contact with Virgil, Enclave spies had provided Vicious with maps of the Commonwealth, marking the locations of the defenses that they had built up over the years. They had also provided Vicious with tactical advice. Although openly disdainful of human help, he was secretly glad that the Enclave had provided them with their analysis of the situation. Vicious planned to advance into the Commonwealth in 3 main columns. His main force would enter the Commonwealth from the southwest through the crater of Atom Settlement. This would allow him to bypass the Minutemen defenders at Vault 95 and reach the southern shore of Lake Cochichuit. He would personally lead the left wing and confront the defenses at Fort Hagen. The Enclave had indicated that the Minutemen war chief, Preston Garvey, was there. Vicious wanted to personally kill this Garvey, as it was proper that the chief warriors face off against each other. Meanwhile, the right wing would go east over the Charles River Bridge and directly into southern Boston. He left command of the right wing to a Commonwealth chieftain named Strong. Vicious expected that Strong would know where an attack would cause the most damage and casualties. The coastal thrust would be led by an Appalachian supermutant named Torment. Torment's thrust would go directly against one of the largest southern defenses of the Commonwealth, the fortress city of Quincy. After the Gunner War, the city of Quincy was repopulated and now hosted the 4th Minutemen Company. It held the door to the Commonwealth coast. Taking Quincy would cut off the Warwick and Mirkwater settlements, along with the Atom Cats repair yard. They would also be in a position to threaten the Neponset, Jamaica Plain, and the University Point settlements, as well as the Vault 88 Research Institute. Vicious hoped that an assault on Quincy would capture the attention of the Minutemen at the castle and tie up a substantial portion of the forces as his own thrust would deep into the side of the Commonwealth. 10 days after the columns attacked, the last column would arrive. A Californian supermutant named John Ashington would take a band of supermutants on a long march around the western edge of the Commonwealth and lead an assault using the western road that led into the Commonwealth. Ashington was one of the few supermutants that remembered and used his human name. He also steadfastly refused to eat humans. Despite this strange behavior, Vicious knew him as a steady commander and a loyal companion that had been with them since their days in the Master's army. This thrust would put the supermutants within striking distance of the Lexington factory, and would block any reinforcements coming from New Hampshire. By launching separate attacks, Vicious hoped to split the already weakened Minutemen defenses and force them to defend elsewhere. His overwhelming numbers would then grind down the Minutemen piece by piece. In addition to these attacks, Vicious planned a series of actions deep behind enemy lines to hamper the Minutemen response. The day before the invasion, Nightkin supermutants would use their stealth boys to cross into the Commonwealth without one Minuteman Frontier Guard even knowing they were there. Normally, Nightkin would attack any human they saw, but Vicious had been specific as to what they could and could not do. The Nightkin had more important targets up north. The Enclave had provided Vicious with a set of targets that would hamper the Minutemen response to the invasion. Vicious sent Nightkin warriors on with explosives to target these key points. He told them to avoid humans until the invasion started, and then to set off the explosives. Along with the acts of sabotage that the Enclave spies were committing, this would seriously degrade the Minutemen response. His commanders were also advised to try and take human prisoners. Virgil had built FEV tanks at a facility in the Glowing Sea, and he was ready to begin transforming more humans into supermutants. Humanity's time was coming to an end. Now is the time for the supermutant to rule. In the gloom of the night, a caravan approached the gates of the Brotherhood of Steel base at Needham, Massachusetts. The base served as an emergency landing pad for vertebrates coming from the capital wasteland, and also served as a high-powered radio tower to keep the Commonwealth linked to the Brotherhood at the Citadel. A group of friendly caravaneers asked to enter the base. They had been coming around the base for months now, and the Brotherhood Yemen knew them by sight. They were welcomed, as they always brought in quality trade goods. Tonight, however, all they brought was death. Enclave Special Forces quietly killed the guards as soon as they were allowed in. An Enclave spy wandered into the main building and silenced the radio operator before he knew what was happening. Ruthlessly and efficiently, the Enclave Special Forces eliminated the rest of the sleeping garrison. They then planted demolition charges on the broadcast equipment. The Brotherhood in the capital wasteland could not be alerted to what was about to happen in the Commonwealth. The entire base had been massacred. The only failure of the assault was that the riverboat BPS Vigilant was out on patrol. As they left, powerful explosions erupted as the radio station and generators were destroyed. Colonel Kane of the Enclave Special Forces Command was pleased at how the attack had gone. Now, if the supermutant carried out their parts equally as well, then the Commonwealth would soon be nothing more than a memory. They would then have to deal with the supermutants, but that would be a problem for another day. With their task completed, the Enclave troopers boarded the Enclave vertibird and quickly slipped out of the Commonwealth. It would be unwise to have their role in the invasion become public knowledge. Elsewhere, in the southern Commonwealth, Enclave spies prepared the way for the supermutant army to storm their way north. They set up a jamming device at a local transmitter to cut communications from frontier outposts to Minutemen bases further north. They knocked down direction signs on the main roads leading from Boston to the southern Commonwealth. Others sabotaged power lines leading to the southern Commonwealth and telegraph lines leading north to New Hampshire. Operation Silent Misery was quietly and efficiently destroying the Commonwealth defenses. Soon the invasion would launch, and the way would be clear for the supermutants to take the Commonwealth. George Cooper, owner and operator of the radio station WRVR, is woken up by a series of explosions across the river. He sees the explosions and flames at the Brotherhood base, as well as a vertibird leaving the scene. He attempts to call for help using his radio transmitter. However, he finds his transmission is jammed by a signal several miles to the east. He determines that it is probably coming from Relay Tower OSC 527. He takes a lamp and makes the long hike towards the relay tower that is several hours away. Bedford Train Yard is the main train station linking the Commonwealth to New Hampshire. It is the most direct and efficient way of sending vast amounts of troops, material, and other goods from the Commonwealth to the front lines up north. A lone Nightkin supermutant lies in wait for the right time to explode his mini-nuke. He has lived a tortured life for decades, and is ready for his final release. He once held a voice in his head that told him what to do until a human had released that voice. But then the signal made him come east. He didn't like it, and wanted to ignore it. But like the voice before, it forced him to obey. But now Vicious told him that he could release that voice if he did exactly what he was told. So he came to this human place and waited for a dawn to arrive. He would then be free. Across the Commonwealth, its denizens woke up to explosions and gunfire as the Night King struck. At the Salem Naval Yard, an explosion ripped open the bottom of the CNS Alliance, the flagship of the Commonwealth Navy. Explosions also hit the air control tower of the Boston Joint Forces Airport and the Charles River train bridge that linked the northern and southern Commonwealth. Elsewhere, attacks were not as successful. A technician late for work at the Charles River locks literally tripped over an invisible Nightkin warrior and alerted the bridge guards who dealt with the supermutant before he could detonate his bomb. Another Nightkin bomb went off in front of the telegraph office in central Boston. A pair of Nightkin warriors were assigned to terminate President Hancock. They snuck into the Snub 360 building where President Hancock slept. Hancock was only saved by the timely intervention of Intelligence Director Fahrenheit. Along with the Enclave sabotage missions, the Nightkin strikes left the Commonwealth wounded and taken completely by surprise. The guards at the frontier outpost barely noticed the sounds of explosions coming from the southwest. Generally, the outpost tended to ignore any noises coming from the glowing sea, as long as they stayed there. But this morning, the noise of war came closer, and closer still. A woman came running down the road, a child of Adam, who babbled on about a horde of super mutants coming from the south and slaughtering all in its path. She then continued running north. The commander of the outpost, Sergeant Abbott, decided to radio Fort Hagen and warn them that something was amiss. All he heard on the line was static. Far to the south came the thunder of thousands of feet marching. Abbott knew something bad was coming this way. He sent Minuteman Riley, the fastest runner in the unit, to warn Fort Hagen of what was coming. He then got his men ready for what he knew was going to be his final stand. Meanwhile, at Quincy, civilians living south of the city woke to gunfire and had to flee as super mutants attacked. Captain Ronnie Shaw of the 4th Minutemen quickly rallied her troops and closed the fortress gates to prevent any mutants from entering. She tried using her radio to contact the castle or Fort Hagen, but found it was not working. She then fired off a flare in hopes that the settlements farther north would see what was going on. She then got Fortress Quincy ready for a siege. Preston Garvey was reviewing troop movements at breakfast with his officers when a runner came in from the south. Minuteman Riley reported a large horde of super mutants coming from the glowing sea. Garvey tried to radio Quincy and all the forward outposts, but heard nothing but static on the line. He then tried to contact FOB Needham and got no reply. He now knew something terrible was happening. For nearly 3 years he had expected something bad was going to come up from the south, and he had made plans for this. He sent the exhausted Riley east with a note to the castle to mobilize all Minutemen forces. Another runner went north to try and reach President Hancock with the news. He then activated his own 1st Minutemen and nearby 12th Minutemen Reserve Unit. As the 12th was a reserve unit, it would take time to assemble the troops from the nearby farms and settlements. Garvey immediately dispatched a recon squad south to evacuate the town of Natick Banks and to see what was going on. He sent the rest of his units to man the trenches south of his position. The Minutemen outpost was finally neutralized. Vicious was surprised at how long the frontier outpost had lasted. These East Coast humans were in some ways tougher than the typical NCR trooper that he was used to fighting. A runner from the east brought a message from Torment. The Minutemen had shut themselves in as expected, and he was beginning his attack on Quincy. Vicious sent a message back to Torment. He was to destroy the Poseidon power plant to the east of the town. He wanted the Minutemen focused on the east while he continued his drive here. He then ordered Strong to split off from his column and go east into the Commonwealth to begin destroying everything in his path. After a long and exhausting hike, George Cooper finally arrives at the relay tower and sees a strange device attached to the tower by a cable. He gives the cable a good yank, and the radio interference immediately subsides. Recon squad of the 1st Minutemen arrived and could see the mutants to the south. They could also see super mutants headed east. Sergeant Flynn woke the town mayor and ordered everyone but the settlement guards to evacuate north. She is about to send a runner north to tell Garvey about the mutants going east, when his radio operator tells her that the radio is working again. She informs Garvey about the situation and the column of mutants headed east. Garvey orders Recon Squad and the settlement guards to hold the mutants at Natick Banks, while the 1st and 12th make their way south to join them. Garvey then radios the garrison at Vault 95 to evacuate the Somerville settlement and all the farms in the south. But most important of all, he tells the commander of the 7th to intercept the column headed east to Boston. And to the rest of the Commonwealth, he sends out a one-word message: invasion. It had been 5 hours since a pair of Nightkin supermutants had made an attempt on Hancock's life. He had been transported by intelligence agents to the State House, where he could be more easily protected. Hancock was trying to figure out how a blue-skinned supermutant had stuck into his home, and whether it was some plot by a political rival, when he received messages about explosions at Bedford and Salem, more mutants at the airport, and more explosions from the west. Just then, Garvey contacted him by radio and filled him in on the fighting down south. Hancock was stunned. Garvey had been right all along. The president recovered and asked Garvey what he needed. They agreed that the army had to mobilize and that they would need the bulk of the army back from New Hampshire to help repel the invasion. Lastly, Garvey asked for a proclamation of martial law. They would need to take drastic measures that might not be too popular, but they would need to be done quickly to ensure the survival of the Commonwealth. Hancock agreed to everything. Just before he signed off, he apologized to Garvey for doubting him. War had come back to the Commonwealth. A coded telegraph arrives from the castle. The telegraph instructs the ammunition stockpile to get ready to distribute ammunition to the frontline units currently in combat in the south. The Minuteman sergeant acknowledges the receipt of the message and replies that all will be ready when the time comes. She then crumbles up the telegraph and rips out the telegraph lines so no more messages can be received or sent. She is an Enclave spy that has infiltrated the base. For months, she has been deliberately miscommunicating how empty the warehouses are in order to deceive the Minutemen. As she leaves the warehouse for one last time, she has just added the last piece of sabotage to Operation Silent Misery. Although Preston Garvey had not been able to convince the Commonwealth of the coming threat to the south, he had not been idle. He had developed relationships with officers from all over the Commonwealth. Major Robert McClellan had been gravely wounded in the Raider War years ago, but Garvey found a place for him training new recruits. Now he stood ready to deploy into the field. He summoned his training officers and explained the situation. Even though the recruits were only 4 weeks into their training session, he knew that they would serve. The 11th Training Command would go to war. Star Paladin Olmsted, the senior Brotherhood commander in the Commonwealth, had been up for hours. The attack on the airport had been a shock. Although the Nightkin had not caused real damage, it was a surprise that they were even there. On top of which, no one could get Needham on the radio. President Hancock explained the situation over the radio and invoked Article 5 of their treaty, calling for the Brotherhood to support their ally when attacked. Olmsted agreed that the situation qualified and began getting her forces ready. The Brotherhood forces in the Commonwealth theoretically had 3 vertibirds, 24 suits of power armor, as well as 12 squads of knights and paladins. These were backed up by 30 squads of Yemen and locally recruited militia that supported Brotherhood forces. But if the super mutants wiped out Needham, then the entire garrison there might be dead. More importantly, Needham was the only radio link that the Commonwealth had to the capital wasteland. Maxon had to know what was happening here. She would send a vertibird to fly over the site as she began shuttling troops to the south. The last leg of the Commonwealth military was activated. Boston Police Chief Tolliver sends out word that martial law had been declared and that the Commonwealth militia had been called up. In case of civil war or invasion, the Boston Police Department, the Marshal's Service, and settlement guards are all federalized and pressed into service as the Commonwealth's last line of defense. In addition, martial law allows anyone from 14 to 75 years of age to be pressed into service. For the first time in years, the Commonwealth finds itself fighting for its life. The old park was still abandoned as the Reclamation Corps still had not gotten to work in this part of the Commonwealth. The Corps had just took the robots and left the rotting buildings in place. Lieutenant Miles of the 7th Minutemen had gotten here with his platoon just minutes ahead of the mutant army. His job was to hold this position while the rest of the 7th evacuated the Somerville Place settlement and the rest of the farms in the south by the bridge to the east. They could then detonate the bridge and cut off the access point to the rest of the Commonwealth. But for now, they had to hold. And despite the initial surprise, the mutant army had not been able to advance much. Along with the 10th Reserve Company, her 4th Minutemen had been able to keep the mutants from moving north of the city. They had, however, set fire to the Poseidon power station, and Warwick was now isolated. But that was beyond her control. She sent most of the civilians north, but kept the settlement guards to help her man the perimeter. At the moment they were doing well, but would soon need ammunition. Shaw got a surprise when she heard the sound of power armor operating to the east. At first she thought it was the power armor company back from up north, but then saw that it was in fact the Atom Cats. They had come out to take a hand in the fighting, and were now providing a lifeline for the Warwick settlers to escape. The Atom Cats had not joined the military as they did not do well in a command environment. But they did do a lot of repair work on Minutemen power armor suits. For this emergency, however, the mechanics had taken an interest in helping. Once the evacuation was finished, the Atom Cats went into Quincy to help with the defense of the city. Captain Ebenezer Learned of the 7th Minutemen completed the evacuation of the Somerville area and now pulled out his company to blow the bridge. He knew that they would never be able to be resupplied in Vault 95, so he shut the door and took the company to hold the line of the river. However, as they prepare to blow the bridge, Nightkin warriors appear and slaughter the engineers setting the demolition charges. Ebenezer must quickly relocate the company to the heights above the river to create a new line of defense. He sends a squad down to Egret Marina to evacuate the settlement. Things just got worse. Strong paused to take a look at the WRVR studio. He suddenly remembered Rex Goodman. If possible, he would like to capture Goodman and turn him into a mutant. His stories would be very entertaining for the others to listen to. Fighting has been steady for the last 6 hours, and the Minutemen forces are holding back the mutant army. From this distance, Vicious cannot tell which one is supposed to be Garvey, as they are all wearing the same clothes. The Minutemen defended well from behind walls, and every time he launched an attack they were driven back by heavy fire from behind cover. The Enclave said that the Minutemen would soon be low on ammunition. Vicious had brought a surprise to make them waste even more. They had gathered every feral ghoul in the glowing sea and herded them north. Now the super-mutant army parted as the horde of feral ghouls was released upon Nadic banks. The Minutemen guns tore through the onslaught of ferals, but slowly began to use up their supply of ammunition. On the other side of the battle, Preston Garvey sees the rush of ghouls, and to him it seems that the mutants are using actual battle tactics. He radios back to Fort Hagen to request more ammunition. It is now that things take a turn for the worse. Telegrams have been sent all day long to the ammunition stockpile, but no one has answered. A pair of deputy marshals from Concord are dispatched to check on the stockpile in person. More worrisome is the fact that telegrams are not getting to New Hampshire. They cannot contact the rest of the army. Carl Feinbaum, the head engineer of the telegraph service, determines that the lines have been cut. He sends out a crew to find and repair the lines. Marshals arrive at the stockpile and verify that they have not received a single message that entire day, and that the sergeant in charge of the telegraph is now missing. But worse yet, the stockpile was totally empty of ammunition. The deputies hurry back to Concord and relay the news to President Hancock and Colonel Garvey. With no ammunition, it would only be a matter of days before the front completely collapsed. Although Hancock panics, Garvey takes the news and begins to formulate a response. Firstly, they would pull back the defensive lines to decrease the area that they had to defend, and to make any resupply easier. Next, they would integrate the Brotherhood forces into the defenses. The Brotherhood carried mostly energy weapons, and they were making their own ammunition at FOB Bonaparte. Lastly, the Commonwealth militia used civilian rifles and pistols instead of military-grade weapons. Although much less effective, they had plenty of ammunition. The militia would have to serve on the lines until they could get resupplied. Hancock then sends a message to the Lexham factory to deliver any ammo that they have on hand, and to keep the factory working 24 hours a day. They dispatched a long-distance courier with a message to Colonel Hollis detailing the situation and ordering him to return, but most important of all, to immediately send back any ammunition that he has. Garvey knows that this is an imperfect plan, but it will give him the resources to strengthen the defenses of the Commonwealth. It will also, hopefully, give time for the rest of the army to return from up north and turn the tide of battle. Meanwhile, Director Fahrenheit begins to investigate the rash of sabotage attacks. She believes that someone inside the Commonwealth is actively working against them and is determined to stop them before they strike again. The first day of the invasion is mercifully over for the Minutemen. They held back the mutant army, but took several casualties and gave up quite a bit of ground. But as members of the Commonwealth militia begin to fill the defenses, they have the sense of relief as perhaps Colonel Garvey can lead them out of this predicament. Garvey himself hopes that they can hold out long enough for the reinforcements and ammunition to reach them. Otherwise, thousands of civilians may perish. On the other side of the battle, Vicious is displeased. Although the pre-battle operations worked almost perfectly, things after have not proceeded as planned. Strong crossed the river, but has not progressed from there. Quincy has not fallen, and even here it took too long to capture the town of Nadic Banks. Worse yet, it now appears that the Brotherhood Paladins have been spotted working alongside the Minutemen. He would have to come up with a new plan to crack the Commonwealth defenses before he loses this opportunity. Both sides are exhausted from the first day of battle, but soon the sun will rise once more, and the fighting will resume. In a faraway bunker, Colonel Kane is pleased. Now that the war has begun, whatever way the war turns out, it is a victory for the Enclave and America. The mutants would either overrun the Commonwealth or leave it battered and severely weakened. If necessary, the Enclave now had the means of delivering the final blow to whoever was left standing. The fate of the Commonwealth would now be determined on the battlefield.
Are you awake? Can you hear me? What is your name?
Frank Horrigan, United States Secret Service.